Hello everyone, my name is Mehdi, and in today's episode I'm going to be talking about the image tab in Keyshot. It's a very helpful tool for people who want to minimize their post-processing process time in Photoshop. So in my last video, which came out about 2 months ago, I talked about environments, lighting, and HDRIs. By the way, I apologize for the very long delay. So here I revisited a project from when I was a junior, and I wanted to do some renderings. I wanted to make it look a little more dramatic and a little more mysterious per se. So I used 4 different pins in my HDRI editor, and I'm not using any external light sources, such as the geometry ones that I talked about in my last video. By the way, if you haven't watched it, go and rewatch it. So it looks pretty good, but I want to make it basically pop more. Like the color blue here, it's just too invisible. I want it to, look more saturated. So one thing I could do, I could just render it, and then I could take it to Photoshop, and I could do a whole bunch of stuff in Photoshop. But there's an easier way to fix the colors and the grading and everything else, and that is the image tab. A lot of people don't use it for some reason, but it's very helpful. So this is the default image style. As you can see, it's on basic. And you have a bunch of different options here, which I will be talking about, but we want to go to photographic. So when we go to photographic, you can immediately see a little difference. It got a little darker. So we have this response curve here. So the first thing I always do is I actually change this response curve to linear. But I always like to just try different things. So this is high contrast, this is low contrast, and this is linear. This is just the default option for the contrast. So again, I like to keep it on linear because that would give me more options to play with. Then I want to play with the tone mapping settings. I have exposure here. That is the light exposure. So I always like to take it a little bit to the right. So as I move this, you can see that it gets lighter and lighter. And it affects the whole picture. It doesn't affect just the mask or just the 3D models. It also affects the background. And funny thing is that, as you can see, my samples is almost 500. And when you change these settings, it doesn't actually make your picture re-render. So it just adjusts the light of the picture. It doesn't adjust the lights of the environment or your 3D model per se. So again, what I always like to do, I like to move this handlebar to the right a little bit. I will come back to it, but let's just keep it at 0.5 EV. I do not know what it stands for. White balance. It's pretty straightforward. You can take it back and forth, and as you can see, if I drag it to the right, it makes the blue light color more, I guess, saturated. Again, I wanted to make it look a little mysterious, and I did choose blue here, so I do want to increase this amount for my render. And contrast. Contrast, if you do want high contrast, you can play with this. You would have more options with the curve settings here. But I do like to increase this a little bit to just add more contrast and make it look more interesting. So we have curve here, and we have this histogram here, and it's just a basic histogram that you see on, say, Photoshop. So each of these dots, you can actually manually adjust them here. So shadows, it starts with the very bottom one. I don't like to play with these. I just like to, mess around with these points and these dots to see what looks good and what doesn't look good. So as you can see, if I bring it down, that would add more contrast. I don't want that much contrast, so I'm just going to keep it at 0. Midtones. I do want to increase the midtones just a tiny bit. And lights, as you can see, it increases the light saturation, whatever light sources that you have. Which I do have a red light source, a blue one, and 2 white ones. And this is the whites. So this is just a basic photography thing If you want to increase these the contrast, you want to have an S curve in your histogram. So I would like to, yeah, I would like to just keep it low for now. And this is the last one, highlights. I will come back to this. But let's just say we're happy with this, and I am actually not happy with it. Let's just increase this one a little bit and maybe decrease this a little bit. Okay, so we have more contrast here. You can't even see the back of this model's neck. Then we have color. So this is just basically the control U of Photoshop. You can increase the saturation or you can decrease the saturation. I always like to increase the saturation. It makes it look more interesting. So let's do half. I don't know. Let's do 375. I think this is good enough. And vibrance. It makes the colors in your image pop more. So let's see what happens if I increase this. You can see that like everything is more popped basically. So if you don't want to increase the saturation, if you want to keep the colors as they are, you can actually just increase the vibrance. So we have the same blue that we had before changing the saturation, but now it's more vibrant basically. But I like to increase the saturation because I like a more saturated blue, for example. Denoise. I rarely use denoise because that's if you have a weak system, a weak computer, you do want to use denoise blend or like Firefly filter. But I don't have a I do have a strong system, so I don't really use it. But say you want to render your image at like say maximum 100 samples, which is not recommended, and you have a bunch of different light sources, and maybe you have caustics or something, you do want to increase the Firefly filter. So what happens when you do increase the Firefly filter? All those tiny dots that you see in like your final render, they would disappear. They would just blend in with their environment, and you would lose details basically. So again, I don't like using any of these two, but if you have to, if you have a weaker system, then go ahead. But if you have to, just keep it at a low number so you don't lose that much details. So I'm gonna turn off denoise and let's go to bloom. So bloom is another thing that I don't use as much, but say this one here, actually let me turn it off, see if it makes any difference. So right now I do have area light in those rings. The amount is very low, but it's still emitting brightness from those rings. So if you want to make it look more, I want to say gloomy actually, it just adds a halo of light around your light source. So let me show you what I mean. So let's just put 0 and let's put 1. And okay, check, see if that changes or if that does anything. 5, what's the maximum? It's 2. And bloom radius, bloom threshold. Let's see, it's not doing anything right now because I guess the light source is very weak. But let's just change this for a second so I can show it to you. Emissive. Let's say we have emissive and let's say we don't have bloom on. As you can see, it is not doing anything because the threshold is too high and the radius is too high as well. Let's do 3, let's do 5. Oh, there we go, okay. You can see that something is happening. Now again, this render, this image, that's not a very appropriate image or model for these settings. But if you say have a backlit keyboard and you want to make it look more realistic, you do want to increase the bloom intensity and you do want to use the bloom settings. So this is at 1 and this is at 2. You can see that the whole image, the whole render is trying to just add that halo effect around wherever the light source is. So I don't want to use this. And let me just go back to plastic. And what was it? Half or something. Yeah, that's fine. So vignettes. I'm sure you know what vignettes is. I do use it sometimes, but not all the time. I do put the vignettes in Photoshop, and I'll tell you why. So if I do increase this vignette strength to 1, you can see that it adds like a black border, blurry border to your image. That's what's the maximum? That's a 2. You can see how darker it looks on the corners and on the edges. So one reason I do not use vignettes in Keyshot is because when I render this out, and then let's say I want to take it to Photoshop to do some final adjustment, you can actually see borders. Now, if you increase the sample size, say 2,000 or something, well, those borders become less visible. But if you're doing a 500 sample render, you could see those borders around or like on the edges of your render. So that doesn't look very professional. Obviously, you want it to be clean. You don't want to make it look messy. So if you take it to Photoshop and then you do that in Photoshop, then that's actually a more useful technique to add a vignette. But sometimes I do add just a tiny bit of vignette just to make it look a little darker. Doesn't matter. Another thing I always use is actually this chromatic aberration. So I don't exactly know what it is in photography because I'm not a photographer, but I know what it does in Keyshot. So let's look at the edges of my 3D model. If I do increase this to, let's say 1, it adds a blurriness to the edges of my model, just like a photograph. It makes it look more realistic. Now let's see what's the maximum, 2. And you can change this. You can change the color of this chromatic aberration bias, whatever, and you can actually see that it's affecting the edges of my render. And it does make it look more realistic. I always like to just keep it at this color because I guess that's the standard color, but you can change it if you want to. So let's say blue. You see how weird it looks? Black, does it do anything with black? I don't know. So with white, it just makes it a lot more blurrier. But 2 is too much, so I like to keep it at 1 just to add a little bit more realism. So background color. Background color is obviously just the background color. You can change it to whatever color you want. I never use this, maybe just once, because if I do want to change the background color, I just go to environment, I go to settings, and then I just change. I just changed this. I did talk about it in my last episode, so go check it out. I don't use it. Use front plate. If you do want, again, this is something that I do not like using. If you do want something to be on top of your render, I mean, like why? I have no idea. You could do this. You can change the opacity. But like say you have a logo or something, you want to put it here. You could use this front plate option for the logo, but don't use it. It's just stupid to like put your logo here when you can just easily do it in Photoshop. So you do have the front plate here, like you have the Vayu logo here, and you have the render. You know, it's a really good render, and you're like, you know what? This doesn't look right. What do I do with it? Well, you can take it to Photoshop, and then you can try to clean the logo, just like erase the logo or something, mask it or something. Or you can just render it as is and then add the logo later in Photoshop so you can move it wherever you want to. So again, I do not suggest using layers or denoise. But that is basically it. Actually, let me show you the difference. So this is one of the settings I used, or I just did, and there's another one. As you can see, this is less, I guess, less brighter because the exposure is at 0. This one, the exposure is at 0.5. This one, the white balance is lower. I wanted again to make it look more mysterious, you know, so that the person who's looking at the render doesn't see the whole thing, you know, just leave something to the imagination. But these are 3 different things then I mean they're pretty straightforward. If you just like hover over them, it tells you what they are. So create default basic image style, and this is the basic image style that you have, and this is what we just did in the past like several minutes. So always try to utilize this image settings option thingy, and let me just talk about those two and that one as well. This is duplicate, obviously, if you want to make a copy of the image style that you have, and this is obviously you just like delete the image style. That's about it. And this is so the resolution. This is also pretty useful. I do use it sometimes. But let's say you have this. I think it's 19 by or 16 by 9 or something ratio. I'm not sure. But yeah, you can basically change the ratio here. You can do 1 by 1, 4 by 3, 5, 4, 16, and 9. And you can choose the specific pixels that you want. This chain here, you can actually unlock it, and that would mess up the ratio. Like if you keep it locked, it would keep the same ratio that it was on. But if you do unlock it, then it would just like, it changes it individually. So let's say 1500. Well, that did not do anything. Let's do 12. Oh, well, yep, it does that. You do not want that, obviously. So 16 by 9. And one more thing. Let's say you have this 16 by 9 ratio image or whatever. I think the last one was 5 by 4. And you want to have a 1 by 1 ratio image. So you click on it, and as you can see, the camera doesn't move. The image just gets smaller or bigger, but the camera stays where it was. So if it does mess up your camera settings, you have to go back to your camera setting, and then you have to adjust it based on the ratio you want. And that's basically it, guys. Let me know if you learned anything. If not, tell me why. And okay, so this is another problem that sometimes I face, and basically the way I fix it, maybe there's just an easier way to fix it. I just go and I choose the highest pixel size, and it just goes full screen. But I'm pretty sure there's like an easier way to fix it, but I just don't know how to do it. Yes, let me know if you learned anything. Let me know if you have any questions. And yes, I will see you sometime later. Hopefully, in less than 2 months. Bye.